Exactly 30 minutes to the top of the hour. We embark on our first conversation this Thursday morning. We talk about women's issue. When we look at March, we know it is the Women's Month, and this is in regards to the International Women's Day, which is coming up on the 8th of March. But precursor or prior to that, we just look at some of those efforts that have been made so far as gender issues is concerned, gender parity, and what more we can employ to bridge that divide in terms of gender matters. I am holding court with Daisy Amdany, who is the Executive Director, Crawn Trust. Daisy, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Again, I welcome you for the second time.
Asante sana.
All right, so let's just latch on this conversation looking at this particular day. I mean, every year we mark it, and I know we're just on the 2nd of March, 6 days, but what's the harm in talking about it 6 days to the day anyway? There's no harm. But we do this every year. Just from where you sit, what really is the significance of marking this day?
Well, the significance of International Women's Day is that it gives us a global platform to look at the steps and the advancements that have been made in women's empowerment on social, economic, cultural, and political areas. Because we know that women all over the world have been marginalized in different ways, and there have been demands for centuries. You know, it's not something that started recently. There have been demands over the years for more inclusion and participation of women in the mainstream of every sphere, you know. And so it marks the point where we take stock of how far we've come. We look at what are the challenges that we're facing and the bottlenecks that are, you know, hindering further progress. We also look at measures that have been taken by governments to advance women's rights and women's equality for a more equal and inclusive world, because women make up over half of the populations in the world, but they continue to be marginalized in virtually every sphere.
And I like how you're talking about in different aspects, talk about social, economic, cultural, political. But before we get into some of these facets of life, just talk to me about the progress, because the first time it was marked was in 1911. None of us here was born, definitely. So it shows you, I mean, from way back, just as you rightfully put, there's really been quite a divide as far as gender issues and gender parity is concerned. This is like 112 years later. And of course, we'll come to our own momentarily. But then, in terms of progress, how are we doing? How is it looking like?
We've made significant progress, trust me. Yes, because at that time, the women were fighting for the right to vote. You know, even for us guys, we've never even had to fight for that right. You know, I mean, when it came time to vote.
Actually, it was right to vote, right to a bit of... was it not working for longer hours?
Yes, labor. It was about the labor relations and pay.
Yes,
you know. So you can imagine. Anyway. I mean, there were places at that time in the US, in the UK, women were not allowed to vote because they were not considered as being capable of making political decisions. And so those political decisions had to be made for them.
Just imagine what you take for granted now. Like we're even discussing earlier on,
how
go and
people
vote.
Are boycotting, you know,
and
people are abandoned. Yet
and people wanted rights for that.
To vote, to make the decision on who governs. And they were like, women can't do this. So women organized themselves and demanded for that right to vote, demanded for the right to be able to work, shorter hours, to be paid the same wages as men were being paid for the same job, you know. So we've definitely made strides because, as you say, like for those of us like here in Kenya, some those voting rights, that's never been an issue.
In fact, they even tell you, just go, please go and vote.
Go and vote, and they even facilitate you, and they look at, how they can make it easier and faster for you to vote. In Kenya, of course, when the natives were seeking that right, because they had been denied that right under the colonial system, when that right was given, it was given to both men and women. For women, we've been fighting for political rights, the right to participate and actively participate and be involved in the political process, not voting, but as leaders, because that has been denied.
And we do that up till now.
Yes, it wasn't actively denied in that there were laws that said, women couldn't be leaders, but culturally and traditionally and socially, women were so excluded that they could not participate. One of the things when we were a few years ago, I think maybe 3 or 4 years ago, we did a research on women's contributions, to the democratic space in Kenya. And one of the things we found out is that when the natives were fighting for the right to actually be represented, because they had been denied the right of representation, it was, a colonial system. The threshold that they had put and the requirements for you to even be considered as a leader was so restrictive, even just for the men, that it automatically excluded women. So, you had to have a certain level of exposure. You had to have been a leader, in a certain you had to have led a certain level. You had to be earning a certain amount of money. So women did not have the right to lead. They were not leaders. They didn't even, the men were barely being allowed to be leaders, but the women were absolutely not. They didn't have the level of education. They didn't have the income. So it made it difficult for the men, the African men, the Kenyan men, to be considered as leaders, but it was that much more restrictive that it actually completely excluded women because they could not meet that threshold. And over the years, our struggle politically has been for a more equal playing field, for it to be opened up, for quotas to be put in place, because the law is also a tool for social change. So with the quotas, like now we have the 47 women reps.
Yes.
Guaranteed that every county in Kenya will have a woman leader. So, and that helps move us forward, because by being there, they break those barriers. Where tradition is saying women can't be leaders, where culture is excluding women, the law includes them and gives them the opportunity to be able to showcase their ability to also contribute to development. And it then demystifies leadership and people become more open to it. 2022, look at the strides we've made. We have 7 female governors, despite...
Just hold it there, Daisy, and let's track a bit, because you did even touch on equal playing field, and I want us to stick to that political note just for a moment. Yes, much as we have the 47 counties, and of course that automatically means that we'll definitely have 47 county women representatives, in addition to women in terms of leadership. But even at that, does it provide an equal and level playing field?
No, it doesn't. So the thing is, the law facilitates. It provides us the opportunity to work towards leveling that playing field. We have the not more than 2/3 gender principle. The not more than 2/3 gender principle gives us ground zero from where we are to begin. That at a minimum, the opposite gender should be at least a third. And the 2/3 gender principle ultimately is working us towards 50-50 as the ideal, with the tipping point being the 2/3, so that at any point you should never have more than 2/3 and at least a third, because a third is the internationally recognized threshold where you have a critical mass that can actually make a difference. So our failure to do that continues to hamper us, but it's not just also the facilitating the 2/3 gender principle. It's also about the resources. Remember, when you look at the Constitution 2010, one of the things that it is designed to do is to make us a more inclusive society and working us towards a more equal society. So one of the central pillars is inclusion and participation of all people, including previously marginalized groups. And so while we have principles like the 2/3 gender principle, it also speaks to some of the other challenges that make it difficult to have that equal playing field. For instance, the Campaign Financing Act. We know that resources play a huge role in the emergence of leaders and can determine whether you're going to win or lose an election.
Exactly. In fact, more women are locked out because of that campaign financing issue.
Exactly, because how long will you run a campaign? Ideally, we even have timelines. within which campaigns are supposed to be held.
Yes.
You can't run a campaign perpetually because you need resources to run those campaigns. But we have not enforced the Campaign Financing Act, and so you can't restrict the amount of money that is used in the campaigns so as not to make it a money contest.
Who's to blame for that, Daisy? Parliament just refused to pass that. When this matter was brought by the IEBC in Parliament, they said it's blanket. You use whatever amount you want to use.
Yes, I do think, so our legislature definitely is to blame because they are responsible to pass the necessary by the way, the legislation exists. It's the regulations that they keep playing around with.
Okay.
IBC also, because IBC as a constitutional body has a mandate. Number one, it's supposed to be independent and it is supposed to enforce constitutional principles. So one of their key mandates is that they are supposed to monitor and track the use of finances in campaigns. But when their hands are tied, when Parliament, the body that is made up of key stakeholders in the electoral process, then hampers IBC's ability to be able to be independent and exercise its constitutional mandate in terms of arbitrating the electoral process, it makes it that much more difficult. But there is actually a court ruling where the courts actually have said that the legislature cannot then now impede IBC's work on enforcing the campaign financing campain financing.
So IBC can actually cap it.
So we hope yes they can set the threat, because it's really not. By the way, it's not really about capping per se.
Okay.
It is about ensuring that the electoral process is not skewed by resources. And it's also about transparency. Who is funding your campaign? Because you see, sometimes the people who fund your campaign also then own you as a candidate. You can be like a Manchurian candidate, you know, so that at the end of the day, you're not representing the people, you're representing the people who have funded your campaign.
Serving their interests.
So one of the requirements of the Campaign Financing Act is that you must declare all sources of funding. So if Doreen is giving 5 million, there are thresholds. What an individual can only give so much, an entity can only give so much, so that candidates are not owned, right? But there must be transparency, and then use of funds. If I give you money for campaign and then you go and buy a house, you know, because you know there are also some people who enter campaigns so that they can
for their
be
own
bought
benefits.
Out. Yes,
I know we are just having this conversation about even the campaign financing and what happened in the previous election, because then we realized that this is one of those things that also did act as an impediment even for women, because when you look at this financing, not so many of them would even have you know, that kind of financing. That's why you realize even some parties they were giving women, young people and PWDs just a pass without having to really, you know, have to finance when it comes to nomination and even the campaigns altogether. So clearly just looking at how we can bridge that divide. But also, on this 2/3 gender matter, it has been a bone of contention. The previous Chief Justice even just did ask the president, the former president, then to disband Parliament, because we have been talking about it since 2010 inception of that constitution. We have seen our current president in his four key issues in the memo that he did send to both speakers. 2/3 general rule principle also featured there, and how they're going to look into that. So when you realize there's always a continuous conversation about this matter, it is even legislated, but we just do not seem to be achieving this. Also, why I asked is because, again, our president, when he was campaigning, he did promise 50-50. We didn't see that, though we are saying that this is that government that is at least trying compared to previous regimes. So then, even as we talk about bridging this divide, what can we do better? I don't want us to get what can we do more, but let's start with what can we do better.
I think what we can do is implement the provisions of the Constitution, and it is at least heartening to see the president working towards that, because previously it's been a battle, and it's no longer now a legal issue, because we have gone to court, we got the dissolution order, we've got court orders from here to wherever.
That was to dissolve Parliament?
to dissolve parliament, compelling parliament to enact the necessary legislation. One, it was 60 days, 40 days, put the legislation in place. So there are many court orders. So it's not a legal challenge anymore. It's actually a political issue.
So you moved away from the law bit of it.
Because how many court orders are you going to get? President Uhuru, former president, ignored every single court order when it came to cabinet, when it came to parliament. They made like they were going to pass the law, but they would always deny it the necessary numbers. So it's not a legal problem. It's a political problem, and it must be dealt with politically. And
when you say political, in what sense? Just elucidate a bit further.
Politics is about interests, okay? And by and large, women are not seen to represent political interests, okay? Because remember, they are newcomers into this space, right? Yeah. And this space is owned, let's say it's owned by people. So it's like women are coming to take away the space for men. The issue of women's political empowerment is seen as the disempowerment of men, the political disempowerment of men, or the political emasculation of men. And women are not seen as representing those interests. Our politics is framed around issues of tribal. You do not see tribes coalescing around women as their leaders. So of course, whenever a tribe is told to bring their leader, they will always bring men. So people don't feel that their interests are served by women, because women, even culturally, at the home, when you talk about inheritance issues, women, for the longest time, up until now, the change of the law and the constitution compelling, women were not seen as being worthy of inheriting land. Why? Because they're transient. These ones, we are going to sell them off elsewhere, so they're kind of like visitors. But even where you are married, you are also not belonging. You are seen as also a visitor. So it's the same thing. So how do these women represent our interests? So those kind of things need to change. Our mindset, we need to be socially change to understand that ideally our political arena is supposed to drive development, and that women can drive the development agenda. So we need to start shifting it that way, and men need to begin to see women as allies, as political allies, as opposed to threats to taking away their political space. So it is definitely a political conversation, right? And I think it's going in the right direction now, triggered by the president's memo. And I mean that's commendable, because at least we are seeing things. If you look at the memo, he has warned them that this thing is not going away. Remember, there is a threat of dissolution, and we don't want to have to deal with that. Because if you dissolve parliament, you've dissolved government, So so that's why I'm saying it's a political problem. It must be dealt with politically. And I think the president is leading in that.
And I mean, just much as maybe he didn't make that 50-50, but also let's just allow the president. I mean, when you look at regime so far, we can say this one at least is trying to some extent to almost get to this 2/3 gender threshold. But also, Daisy, there are some who would say, or should I put there, some critics who would argue that we have done so much so for the woman, even as we look at this International Women's Day, at the expense of the boy. And this perhaps would even come about with some of this, how would I say, programs that even the second lady is introducing. She's really having quite the programs there for the boy child, issues of financing, bringing them on board. And this is emanating from the fact that so much is being done for the girl at the expense of the boy. As a woman, do you even feel that?
So I think these are two separate issues.
Okay, we should not put them together.
We must not see the empowerment of the girl, child, and women as the disempowerment of the boy child and men. Please, how many young men are being married off as children? How many young men are facing child their parents at yet children. Remember, Kenya is third globally in teen pregnancies. That's an issue that
FGM is still on the rise.
FGM, how many boys face FGM? So there are serious challenges that are unique to the girl child, and I think it is also unfair to expect the women to empower the girls and the boys. What is the role of the man? Okay? Where are the men? Men have had dominance in the economic, political, cultural, and social spheres.
All right.
The patriarchal setup has always favored men and boys over women and girls. Okay? So, women have sought to come out from under that disempowerment. And while it is true, we have significant challenges with the boy child and with men, it is not because the women are being empowered.
All right.
It is because our men are emasculated. Even look at our economic systems. You're not able to get a job. The cost of living is so high. You're not able to meet the needs of your family. That is emasculating. That's not because of the empowerment of women and girls. That's because our economic system is not working for the majority of people. Okay? Yeah. And so we have frustrations among our men, They are not able to be there for their families. They're not able to meet the needs. So, you feel helpless. So what do? You look for a scapegoat. Don't scapegoat the women and girls. We are supposed to work together, because empowerment of women, when we talk about equality, it's about partnership and collaboration. It's about being able to work together. It's not about role reversal. And so we must stop looking at this as, in a combative way. How do we come together as women and men, boys and girls? Because even when we talk about the women's empowerment space, we are looking at the involvement of men, because women do not live in isolation.
This is consolidated effort, you say?
Yes, we must consolidate our efforts. We do not live in isolation. Women and men live together, right? And so we must jointly empower each other. I must not see your empowerment as my disempowerment. There's enough space for all of us. We just need to find our space, right? And for us to be able to find our space, we must move away from these arguments of empowerment of the girl child is disempowerment of the boy child. How do we ensure that we move together? And you know what? The women are doing it. The women, part of women's empowerment is men engagement, men and boys engagement. And I like what I see with the men stepping up, with the man cave, and beginning to talk about those issues. What are the issues affecting us as men? The men are coming together and they're learning to speak together. Because remember, a woman can't bring out the man in a boy. And so it is the men to do it, But how do we ensure that we have a common message, right? That the men are not being taught to being a man means being aggressive, being oppressive and suppressive to women.
Okay.
So I think that we need to have a different conversation. The conversation must be different, and it must not be one that is designed to cause friction.
So do you feel that maybe is where we might have missed, or we sort of like are inclining to miss the mark, that we are more or less get it like we are competing? So then we feel that one gender has been done for so much at the expense of the other gender, yet we are equally agreeing that also the other one needs just as much. We are more or less like competing as opposed to
collaborating. We're competing as opposed to collaborating. Yes. So we're not in a competition. Even the Bible tells us that when Yahweh he made us male and female. By the way, woman was not an afterthought. He says, let us make man in our own image and likeness. Man at that time, language has evolved. But the original meaning of the word man means the cognitive thinker. It does not denote male, right? So he said, let us make man in our own image and likeness. So let us make people in our own image and likeness. And the scriptures tell us that he made them male and female. So we were not at an afterthought. But he said, let me make man a suitable companion comparable to himself. So we are complementary beings.
Not competitors.
It's complementarity, not competitors, and absolutely not oppression. It's not oppression and subjugation. Absolutely not. You know.
We are not competitors.
No, we are not competitors.
Yes.
We are
complementary. We are complement.
Yes, so it's about complementarity.
Yes.
Yes.
I also want us to talk about the theme, that is the digital innovation and technology for gender equality, and just how this theme is important. First of all, just demystify what this theme means, because you realize every year there's a theme that comes with the day. Just a clear picture and understanding of what this digital innovation and tech for gender equality first of all means.
So, you know, technology is what is driving the world today.
Oh, yes.
In fact, Corona did us a huge favor because it helped leapfrog us into the use of technology, right? But the technology and innovation has made goods, services and information more readily available to people. And so this digital is like making that digital space and digital sphere available to all. Let's take, for instance, one of Kenya's great innovations, and it's globally recognized, M-Pesa.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Think about the innovation of M-Pesa, what it has done. You needed to go, if you needed money, you had to go to a bank. And there are places where there were no banks, because remember, the banks, if there wasn't enough people around, maybe the nearest bank is 10 kilometers away. It removed that whole distance, but then also gave you personal access to your money. You remember, there's in some communities there's that mentality of mwanamke anatakia pesa nini. So what does she need money for? So everything, for anything, you have to go ask for money and explain why you need this money. But M-Pesa gave you that privacy and that independence. You could receive money on your phone, it is yours. But it also spurred other innovations. How many businesses, a lot of women, by the way, benefited from M-Pesa because it opened up avenues for business. It gave you your own, that wallet is like a bank, so you can have money. So it has made, it expanded space and made services available. Think about digital services.
Just hold it there. We want to take a very quick break, Daisy. We come back there and you continue telling us about this digital services. Also, we look at the flip side of it, the kind of challenges it has emanated, how it's being dealt with, and how to move forward from that. We continue with this conversation. Due for that break, we'll circle back with plenty more of this. Stay with us. Well, the conversation is just as sweet off air as how it was on air. We are back. Daisy Amdany, Executive Director, Crawn Trust, is my guest, still holding court with her. Women's issues coming to the fore. Daisy, before we delve deeper to much of these issues and trying to just get perhaps possible solutions and chart the way forward, you were telling us before that break just the whole idea behind this theme, digital innovation and technology for gender equality, and what it is doing, also matters of digital services. Tell us more. So
I was coming to the point of look at the digitization of certain services. I don't know how old you are, because maybe you came in with the digitization. But
how old do you think I am?
I don't know. You know, Gen Z.
Gen Z, you say?
But I'm telling you, you know, if you needed to pay for electricity, you had to go to electricity house
physically
and stand in the queue. That is how you paid for your electricity. Today, the digitization of services has made it that you can pay it from the comfort of wherever you are on your phone.
Are we even talking about the number of services the government is thinking of onboarding from 200 to about, is it 5,000?
Yes, but you look at that e-service, so many things that you don't need to go to places, just from the comfort of your phone. So it has made services accessible. You know, when we had the provinces, Rift Valley province was the largest province, and the headquarters for Rift Valley province was Nakuru. if you needed anything from your provincial headquarters and you were in Oloitoktok,
you come to Nakuru.
You know, Oloitoktok is the border of TZ. You had to come, you come through Machakos, you come through Nairobi, you come through Kiambu, you go to your provincial headquarters.
To Nakuru.
So inconvenient. And then when you get there, maybe the officer in charge is not even there. Munasumbuana. So you're talking about whether it is, you know, your pension, your whatever, you know, people traveling long distance, till you just give up. So it makes services
You can
accessible.
imagine, especially if it's a woman and maybe pregnant, you had to travel all this since on the International Women's Day.
Yes. So you're able to register. So digitization has made services accessible. Think about, like now, the Hustler Fund. You know, banking, M-Pesa revolutionized banking. Banks like Equity, banking the unbanked. But the digitization of certain services has removed even those bureaucracies. That fund has been able to disburse from its launch 19 billion Kenya shillings. Over. I'm sure it is
this
over.
This is just 3 months.
Can you imagine?
About 3 months since it was launched.
That's a huge amount of money. You're talking about people borrowing, paying back, you know. So it's not that one where you have to go and sit where ni nani, utalete nini. You know, so it removes bureaucracies, it removes barriers and makes things more accessible to people. Now for women, it's that much more easier because you think about the role that women play. I always like to ask men sometimes when we're at the grassroots and they say, oh, sometimes you people, you are really, you know, pushing the agenda for women. So we ask them, okay, let's take just your morning this morning. How have you interacted with water? You know, just water. You know, for them, they wake up, they find the water is there, it has been warmed, the food is but that woman, she got up at 4, she went, she got the water, she warmed it for you, she's washing. She bathed the baby, you know, there's a baby. Exactly, cleans up and manages that water. You have no such encumbrances. So imagine that lady with all the roles that she's playing at the touch of a phone. And it doesn't even need to be a smartphone because like with M-Pesa, you can use a feature phone. You know, just bonyeza and you've got everything done. It makes your life easier. It frees you up, gives you more time. It helps you. You're able to do more with your time. So, I mean, technology has moved things forward. Let me give you another example. COVID. You know, women for the longest time were denied the right to even work from home. If you got pregnant, hey, the women were losing their jobs because
it's like the end of you.
Yes, you can't be productive. You could not be productive from home. You go have your baby. But look at what COVID did. COVID shut down offices and everything, and people had to work from home. But there were applications, innovative digital applications that were created. Zoom, GoToMeeting, Gumzo, you know, different applications that allowed you to continue working. And suddenly, people could work from home, right? And be productive.
And it became okay to do so.
Exactly. So it has leapfrogged us. Today, you can work from home. Today, people are working remotely, right? And they are being productive. They are making money. So it has expanded that sphere. We have new opportunities in those digital spaces. There's even e-sports. Did you know that? E-games. There's e-games. I think we have one of the champions is a lady here in Kenya.
You are just informing me. It's a learning process, so I'm also learning about it.
So the digitization opens a whole new world, okay?
You know, Daisy, you talk about digitization, and I totally agree with you. And also this theme will serve its purpose for this year's International Women's Day. But you did raise a matter, especially when it came to COVID-19 and how working from home became a norm. You know, everything was almost normal. Those that looked abnormal then actually were normal. But that question of even women getting pregnant, you remind me of a conversation I just had this week on Monday. And the lady professor I was talking to, this was all about career versus motherhood. So then should you give up one for the other, looking at just how women are being treated even in the workspaces. And when you look at some of these issues, even up till today, they still continue to be there. And it looks like, yes, we are making strides, but there's some things that are sort of like robbing us the strides we've made. How should we deal with this? Does it need to be a legislative matter? Does it need to be just an agreement? What does it need to be? Because you realize, I ask this because you realize it's good enough. We are making progress. But some things such as this, you just can't get pregnant and go home and be sure of your job. Some women are even getting scared of being pregnant because they wonder, okay, this might just be the death sentence for my career or my job.
Well, okay, let me say this.
Yeah.
It's a social issue, and I think it's also, these are individual conversations that need to be had.
All right.
Motherhood is very important, and that must not be negated. It absolutely must not be negated. And when you make the decision to have a child or to start a family, you must also understand that as a woman, there are certain things it will take away from you, because the nurturing of that child, at least for the first 3 years, it's like even your food is on it. The baby's food is on your person, okay? So the question here that we're asking, because in this world that we live in today, most households depend on 2 incomes for you to really be able to make it through.
Yeah.
So how then do we make it facilitative for women to play that role without being overburdened by the additional role of having to bring in additional income, right? And that's why we talk about issues of unpaid care work, okay? So unpaid care work is the work that women do on a daily basis in the homestead, for which when you are away from the homestead, you need to employ somebody to do it. So like you're here, maybe when you go home, you have to cook, you have to clean, you have to do everything. So aside from, you've come from the office, you're tired, but those things have to be done, right? Yeah. And you're not paid for it. However, if you leave the home and you have the income, you would pay somebody for it. But it's not recognized as work for the most part. So how do we make it easier for women? In the West, that's how they developed, appliances, washing machines, dishwashing machines, hoovers. These things make your life easier. It makes it quicker for you to do those things. They're still very expensive here. Childcare. Maybe you need to go and do something quickly. You've got biashara. Where do you leave your child? You can't go with your child. Do we have care centers? Where that your baby, you can leave your baby and your baby will be safe and well looked after, if it is in the office, like now here at the KBC, does the company facilitate young mothers so that you can come to the office with your baby and there's a crash? We had that conversation at some point. Yes. I wonder how the direction it took. And there are companies that are doing it. We know companies like Safaricom have done it. So it makes it easier for you to work. You don't have to have the stress of, is my baby okay? Well, your baby, you can just walk away from your desk and go see your baby. You can breastfeed your baby. You can even play with your baby. So what we are saying is that women can be facilitated to play those additional roles without it being seen as oppressive. It makes it more equal, makes the women continue with their role, their motherhood roles, and also bringing additional income into the homestead, right? When you say that, I'm just also reminded of that time when we had the conversation about also leave days, and the Teacher Service Commission at least increased that in the 2021-2025 CBA from, is it 14 to 21 for men and 90 to 120 for women, and the whole talk was, can also other institutions employ this, adapt these measures just the way you're saying, to also make it easier, for women to be more productive in the job space, because again, you also can't leave one for the other. I mean, sure, you shouldn't. Women shouldn't have to make that choice. Yes. They shouldn't have to be forced to make that choice. But most are being forced to make that choice. Unfortunately, because we are not facilitating them. And that's why we are having those conversations. Right. UN Women is driving that conversation in terms of developing a policy. And actually, this administration is very keen on it, on issues around gender responsive budgeting, around how do we recognize unpaid care work? What do we need to do to recognize it, remunerate it, and to facilitate women in being more productive, even as they play those roles? So it's a conversation that is happening.
Might you be privy to maybe what the Ministry of Gender might be doing in regards to some of this?
In fact, the Ministry of Gender is the one that is spearheading it.
Okay.
The UN Women is working together with them, but of course, it's not a singular ministry because it's cross-cutting.
Yes.
Remember, it has to be in every ministry because it's a planning issue.
Yeah,
it's a labor issue.
And these women are there in every ministry anyway.
Absolutely.
And everywhere.
Exactly.
Okay.
But it is being spearheaded. The State Department of Gender are on it, and it's a conversation that is definitely being had. So everything is working towards how do we make our world more inclusive? How do we make our country more inclusive? How do we make government and processes more inclusive?
I hear you. And we are almost wrapping up, but I feel like it will be a disservice not talking about some of those challenges that have been posed in the digital space. Also, of course, this in line with the theme that you're having this year, and also taking cognizance of the fact that the world is digital. That is where everything is moving to. We've just talked about the 5,000 government services that the government is planning to onboard. So clearly it shows you that a good number of services will be in the digital space. But much is a good thing. It is a positive thing. What are some of those challenges that we are seeing in this platform that are equally also impeding women from getting to these spaces? And so how then do we deal with them?
So of course there's issues of abuse of that space, bullying, cyberbullying and all. But already those things have caught the eye of the authorities and people are also working towards it. Issues around data safety, data privacy. I think Kenya is ahead of the pack. We have one among the strongest data protection laws in the country. So it's about enforcement. Remember, we have the Office of the Data Commissioner. We have the Commissioner, I'm
forgetting her
Kasait.
name.
Yes, Commissioner Kasait. And so I think that the government is also looking at how to address those challenges. But also we have non-state actors that are also driving those conversations. How do we ensure that people are protected in those spaces? Because there's always people who will abuse those spaces, right? But we must also be careful not to be so restrictive as to then make those platforms, because there's also the cancel culture where if you say something that people don't like, you are shut off, and sometimes being shut off now, that social media space literally mutes your voice. So we need to strike a balance. I think we do have, within the police services, they're also looking at, how to better police that space. And people are beginning to learn what are the harms. How do we minimize the harms that are coming out of those digital spaces? How do we ensure that people who abuse those spaces don't get the opportunity to do it or are penalized? So those are conversations that are definitely happening, and women are being trained on how to protect themselves, in those spaces. Yes. And of course, I mean, it's just like in everyday life, even in real physical life, you've got wakoras, pickpockets, nini. So, we have laws to deal with those things. And I think our data laws and the initiatives that are emerging will also see, how to manage those spaces.
Yeah, such an interesting correlation there, that just in our day-to-day life you'd have wakoras and pickpockets, and you're taught how to manage and deal with that. Nonetheless, Daisy, thank you so much for your valuable inputs into this conversation, and also highly appreciate just looking at some of those efforts that are being mulled over, that are being done by different stakeholders to see that indeed it's not talk, that we do implement it at the end of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
I have been speaking to Daisy Amdany, who is the Executive Director, Crawn Trust. Definitely what has formed center of our conversation is looking at the International Women's Day, some of those efforts that are being made, and how to move forward with regards to some of those loopholes still existing as far as gender parity and gender issues is concerned. Good place to end this conversation, but Good Morning Kenya continues after this breather. Stay with us.